One day, something very sad happened. Silly and Abasi's parents, who loved them so much, passed away. It was a very difficult time for Silly and Abasi. They were still young and didn't know how to cope without their parents. The house that was once filled with laughter became quiet, and the joy in their hearts turned to sadness. Silly and Abasi had to be strong. They had no one else to take care of them, so they decided to take care of each other. Every day, they worked hard. Silly would go to the market to sell fruits and vegetables while Abasi helped the farmers in the fields. They did everything they could to ensure they had food to eat and clothes to wear. Even though life was harder without their parents, Silly and Abasi grew even closer. They shared everything, from their food to their worries. They would sit under the big tree at the end of the day, talking about their dreams and how they would make their parents proud. As the years passed, Silly grew older. She was no longer the little girl who played in the fields with Abasi. Now she was a young woman. In PLEADED, young women were expected to marry. Most girls in the village got married at 18, but Silly was already 25 and still hadn't married anyone. Her relatives began to worry. They would come to her house and say, "Silly, you are getting older. All the girls your age are married with children. Why haven't you found a husband yet?" Silly would smile politely and say, "I want to choose the right man. I'm not in a hurry." But the pressure kept growing. Her relatives wouldn't stop reminding her that she needed to get married. They would whisper behind her back, "Why is Silly still single? She's so beautiful. What is she waiting for?" Even the villagers began to talk. They would see Silly in the market and say, "Silly, when will we hear the sound of wedding drums for you?" Silly felt the pressure but didn't want to rush into marriage. She wanted to make sure she married the right man, someone who would love and respect her. She had been seeing a man named Deli for a while. He was kind and hard-working, and Silly liked him, but she hadn't decided if he was the one. One day, after another visit from her concerned relatives, Silly sat down and thought long and hard. She didn't want to be the last unmarried woman in the village, and she didn't want people to keep talking behind her back. So, she made a decision. Silly went to Deli and said, "Deli, I think it's time for us to get married." Deli smiled and was very happy. He had been waiting for Silly to say those words. "I will make you happy, Silly," he promised. Preparations for the wedding began, and the whole village was excited because Silly, the most beautiful girl in PLEADED, was finally getting married. The drums would soon beat, and the songs would fill the air. Silly was about to take the next big step in her life, hoping she had made the right choice. Silly and Deli's wedding was the biggest the village of PLEADED had seen in a long time. The drums beat loudly, the songs were sweet, and everyone danced with joy. The whole village came to celebrate Silly's big day. It was a day full of happiness and excitement. After the wedding, Silly moved in with Deli and his family. She was determined to be the best wife she could be. Every morning, Silly woke up early to fetch water and prepare food for the family. She cleaned the house until it sparkled and helped Deli's mother with anything she needed. Deli's family was pleased with Silly. His mother would say, "Silly, you are such a good wife. We are lucky to have you." And Silly would smile, feeling proud of herself. But as time passed, something began to worry Deli's mother. 2 years had gone by since the wedding, and Silly still hadn't had a child. In PLEADED, children were very important, and wives were expected to have them soon after marriage. Deli's mother started to worry and wonder why Silly hadn't become pregnant. One day, she asked Silly, "Silly, is everything okay? It's been 2 years, and there's still no child. What's wrong?" Silly felt sad and unsure. She didn't know why she hadn't gotten pregnant. She wanted a child as much as Deli's mother did, but nothing seemed to be happening. "I don't know, Mama," Silly replied quietly. "We are trying, but nothing is happening." Deli's mother frowned and thought deeply. She loved Silly but was worried about the future. She wanted grandchildren to carry on the family name. Every time she looked at Silly, she would sigh and shake her head, wondering what the problem could be. Silly noticed that Deli's mother was becoming more distant and worried. The house that was once filled with laughter and joy was now quiet with concern. Silly continued to do all her chores and help around the house, but inside, she felt the weight of not being able to give Deli and his family a child. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, but still, there was no baby. Silly began to worry too. She prayed every night, hoping for a miracle, but deep down, she feared what might happen if she couldn't have a child. As the months passed and still no child came, Deli's mother grew more anxious. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to know if the problem was with Silly or Deli, so she came up with a secret plan. One day when Silly was away, Deli's mother brought another woman into their home. This woman was young and beautiful, and Deli's mother had chosen her because she was sure she could have a child. She spoke to Deli privately and said, "My son, I want you to be with this woman just for a little while. We need to know if you can father a child." Deli was surprised and didn't know what to say, but he trusted his mother and reluctantly agreed to her plan. A few weeks later, the woman came back with news. She was pregnant. Deli was shocked, and his mother was overjoyed. It was clear now that Deli was not the problem.